we're going to talk today about responding to student writing. I would like to first of all hear from each of you. I know two in the group, but tell me your name again and what courses you teach or what department you teach in.
So I'm going like that, I teach biology and environmental sciences, and I teach a mixture of freshman classes, graduate level classes, always trying to integrate some form of writing, scientific essays and books.
Cool. Thank you for being here. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm brand new. James Thompson, instructional leadership, and I teach research and education.
Okay. Okay, I was going to ask that. All right, great.
In Woods, I'm in the English department. I teach mainly composition. So my whole life is what we're talking about.
Yes.
Composition, world literature, I work mainly with freshmen and sophomores.
Great. So glad to have such a good mix coming from different areas. It's important because what we're talking about today is responding to student writing regardless of the class. We often assume they're writing in an English course, but obviously writing is taking place in other areas as well. And as professors, we may or may not feel adept at responding to the writing that we encounter. We may have certain expectations, but not always know what to do when students don't quite live up to that. So we're going to try to cover a little bit of ground today. Helping students become deep readers is one of the first things that we'll talk about, which actually has to happen before they can do anything. We're going to talk about designing our courses to reward deep reading, understanding the link between writing and thinking, designing writing assignments that prompt critical thinking, using class time and pre-assignments to help students with the process, using rubrics to make clear your expectations and to focus your attention when you grade, and making sure your comments support rather than stunt students' growth. So that's a lot to cover in a short time, but we'll do the best we can. Certainly, I invite you to engage me later in conversation if we need to go into something in more depth. But first of all, let's talk about what we see as the ideal student. What does that student look like? From the courses that you teach, what does that student look like?
I think for most of my classes, it's just a student that is open to developing thinking skills.
Okay.
That to me is that they're open to the idea of learning.
Okay.
For me, I met with one student, only got one student in my research class. Engaging her last week's conversation to know where she is as far as doing research, so we could begin to do literature review, and hoping that by the end of the course, she'll be ready to submit a research proposal project.
So a student who actually progresses through the term to meet the goals.
Know a certain, be at a certain level.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That openness is very important.
Yeah.
My ideal student is one that engages with me.
Yeah.
And appears to be interested, even if they're not. In other words, I feel like I can build a rapport with that student.
Yeah.
You know, my ideal student is one that's interested in being there. They find the subject matter interesting.
Right.
Even if it's not their major.
Right. Okay, so I'm curious to know if any of you have encountered students who might write papers, research papers, with these sorts of titles. Differentiation in synaptic function or Drosophila neuromuscular junctions, a good example. Seen any undergraduate students writing papers with titles like that? Density, functional theory, investigation of the reaction mechanism for hydrogen generation from ethanol over a palladium catalyst. That's from engineering. Sounds heavyweight. Sounds like titles of dissertations. Sorry?
Yeah, so the senior students, I would say, may think things like that.
Okay. How English proficiency affects the income of Hispanic immigrants. Hair color and perceived job ability, why stereotypes attached to red-haired men and women may lead to hiring discrimination. So these are titles of research papers that were submitted to the 2008 National Conference of Undergraduate Research. And the writer of this text that I'm drawing from, John Bean, suggests that too often our students are not producing work at this level, that they actually have a different concept of what a research paper should be, and so they fall far short of the standards that we perhaps have of them when they come into our course. So the question becomes, how do you get your student to that level of ideal, and what do you do when they're not where you wish they would be? We will be frustrated if we set unrealistic expectations for ourselves or our students, obviously. Writing is a process, not a product. And so when it comes to the writing that students do, we have to look at whether or not they are following the process that it takes to get to the end result that we wish they would submit. We often place our focus on that end result, not appreciating the path that it takes to get there, and understanding that each student is at a different point on that path towards academic literacy, which, by the way, includes writing, but is not limited to writing. When we talk about academic literacy, we're talking about them actually understanding what it is that we do in this academic space, right? And that's what's going to actually get them to be able to even accomplish some of the things that we are asking of them. So, are we doing our part? We must cultivate learning environments and avoid perpetuating a school culture of pseudo-learning. So Bean talks in this text about the culture of pseudo-learning that we have inherited with our educational system, where it's rote memorization and regurgitation of information, right? And so then we expect them to be critical thinkers when they come into the university. That can be challenging. We do our services an injustice by letting them slide through with mediocre skills, which sometimes we might be tempted to do, but we also have to set realistic expectations of our students based on where they are. So what we might have to do at times, depending on what it is that we're trying to accomplish, is think in terms of depth, perhaps rather than breadth. It may be better for them to get deep understanding of key and core concepts rather than trying to cover the whole 12 chapters in a semester. Intellectual growth takes time. That will extend beyond us, beyond the semester, and beyond their matriculation. So I challenge us to think in terms of those bigger picture goals, not just the limited goals of accomplishing, a certain number of pages in a particular textbook. What is it overall that we want them to be able to do when they leave here? And how can we help them move along that path in the course that we're teaching? So it's bigger than us. We should focus on providing them with tools that transcend these four walls. Parents, you can't teach your children every lesson they will need in order to succeed in life. I am learning that every day. So I'm challenged to think about the best thing that I can provide my children and the students that I encounter. How can I give them tools that will help them, and how can I help them practice those tools in some way? So what can we do to equip them for what's next? Obviously, we don't want them to be here forever, right? So there's 3 steps that I would suggest we look at in getting them down that path. First of all, recognizing the value of writing. I'm so glad you all are here because you already demonstrate that you see that writing is valuable. Help students learn how to be deep readers and create assignments that force critical thinking. These are the tools that will help them to accomplish whatever the tasks are that we give them. So, only one of you in here is a writing teacher, but the reality is you don't have to be a writing teacher to incorporate writing in your course. Becoming a strong writer begins with becoming a critical thinker. So you can use writing to promote deep thinking in any subject. Writing doesn't have to be graded to be effective. The act of writing, the act of having students put things down on paper in and of itself can be beneficial to them. And you don't necessarily have to grade it. A lot of times non-writing teachers are so worried about the extra paper load that a writing assignment might, adding a writing assignment to their course will add. Not necessarily. There's a way to incorporate writing that will not necessarily increase your burden as a teacher. So tomorrow's workshop, we will actually talk more in depth about writing and critical thinking. But today we're talking about responding to students. So I want to begin by talking about deep reading. So what do I mean by deep reading? Well, it's the opposite of skimming, first of all, which I know our students love to do. And a lot of times they are trained even from, I have children in my home who are middle school and under. I have been, younger than that, and they really are sort of conditioned to just find the highlighted keywords, memorize them real quick for the test, and that's the end of their reading experience. So we want to retrain our students to do the reading and rereading in order to understand an author's purpose and perspective, to truly engage. I heard that word a little while ago about students being engaged. We need to teach them how to do that. They need to adjust their reading strategies based on the task and the genre. There are certain types of reading that require certain types of text that require different type of reading. And depending on what you're reading for will also dictate the strategies that you use to read. And they need to understand that. Students tend to just read every text the same way, start to finish, maybe skimming over it, skipping things, and without any real plan or purpose in mind. They also need to recognize that the reader is in conversation with the author of any given text. A lot of times they approach texts, particularly ones in school, as being law, rule. That's it. This person wrote it, I'm supposed to absorb it, and I'm not to question it. And so that's something that we need to talk about. And then the understanding of vocabulary and syntax. We are doing workshops this semester to teach our students how to be better readers and note takers. And one of the things I always emphasize is read with a dictionary nearby. You cannot skip over those words you don't understand. You have to begin to expand your vocabulary in order to fully become a literate, educated person. So we can help them do this. Deep learning begins with deep reading. If we want students to read carefully, though, we need to design our assignments in a way that will reward deep reading. And we're going to talk about that. So require reading for meaning. Give homework assignments that demand deep reading. And admit the reality that sometimes the things we ask them to read might be hard. Go ahead and give them that heads up, right? Prepare for it to be hard, so take the time that is needed to engage with it. Because the assignment I'm going to give you is going to require you to know what you read, not just some of the keywords that popped up. So you might explain that some of the readings were intended for a different audience. If you're having them read articles from peer-reviewed journals, those articles were written for professionals in this field, right? So talk to them about their position on the outside of this field at this point, but talk about the ways to become the insider that would be able to recognize the allusions and the references that are made when an article is written to those within the profession. We can't just dump them into a library and tell them read all these peer-reviewed texts and not give them the tools to know how to interpret what they're given. So it may be hard, but not impossible for them to understand. They should not feel stupid, and we want to make sure we're equipping them with what they need to navigate those difficult texts so that they don't. Better for them to say, I have trouble with this because I'm an outsider. I just got here. I'm still learning this field, but I'm not having trouble because I'm a poor reader, because we're going to show them how to be good readers. Share your own strategies. What do you do when you approach a difficult text? What do you do when you're doing your own research? That's the kind of things that will help them to do the same, right? We're trying to help them become like us, educated professionals in a particular field. So use what you have and what you know about doing that in order to help them to accomplish it. How do you determine when you're going to skim and when you're going to read slowly? When you're going to read the abstract and the conclusion first and then go back and see what the methods were, right? So give them some of those tips and tools. When do you take notes? And when do you read with skepticism? Right? You got to have some understanding of who it is that this is writing, who the author is, what their background is, how they are positioned within the field. Give them that information so they can take a look at what's being offered and determine what their position is in relation to it. So let's talk about what doesn't work when it comes to helping our students be deep readers. Quizzes. Bean says, quizzes encourage students to extract right answers from a text, rather to engage with the text's ideas, and they don't invite students to bring their own critical thinking to bear on a text argument or enter into the conversation with the author. He also says, don't lecture. You know, students only remember a fraction of what we say anyway, right? So save yourself the breath as often as you can. Lecturing over readings initiates the vicious reading cycle where teachers explain readings because students are poor readers, and students read poorly because they know the teacher's going to explain it when they get to class. So, what are the strategies that will help them? We need number one. Thank you. We have a handout coming around. Can I have one to look at? Thank you. This is Krishandra, everyone. She's one of my grad assistants, and this is Ariana, who is moderating our Zoom. We have a couple who are joining us online. Hello to those of you who are watching via Zoom. So what's coming around is a handout about reading, how to help our students become deep readers, and the types of assignments you might provide them in order to do that, as opposed to maybe doing a quiz or a lecture over a chapter that you've assigned. Bean says, if you want to address the causes of students' reading difficulties, we must try to change academic cultures that reward surface learning. The key is to change the homework dimension of a course to require reading for meaning. Increasing homework demands not necessarily mean adding more reading, but to develop homework tasks that require deep reading, deep rather than surface processing. So he has some examples of assignments that have been given. So in that box there on the first page, the objective for today's class is to describe and analyze the causes of racial inequality. The background is consider the following data from the U.S. Census Bureau, and the assignment is to read the chapter and then generate 5 testable hypotheses you believe might account for the difference in income given above. So asking them to do something with the information that they have gleaned from the text, and that being the homework, not just to read it. The second example he gives is having students, as they read, to assess what the author is doing in each section of the reading. So talk about what it says and what it does. This forces them to not just stay on the surface. What do the words say on the page, but what is the author doing in this section of that reading? And so after being assigned a chapter, they might give you that what the author says and what the author does as their assignment, or bring that to class and you all discuss it. What does this section say and what does it do? We have a question from the Zoom. I will, they can either, if they're not able to come by to pick up the documents, we will scan them and make them available on the website. And they can email me if it doesn't come in the next couple of days. It'll take a little while, we got a lot of paper. Okay, the page 180, some students are more visual. So rather than, you might have them, another easy exercise to have them do after reading something is to provide a summary of it, right? But if they're more visual, you might have them map out the main ideas of the text that they've written, which is a way to help them organize the significant points that were made and how they connect, perhaps in a different way than just summarizing it. And then page 81, the last page of this handout, or no, second to last, he provides us with strategies that will address different problems that students have. I won't go through each one of those, but if they have a poor reading process, he provides some suggestions. Failure to reconstruct arguments as they read, he gives some suggestions for those, and so on. So this is something that you can maybe look back on and see which of those types of assignments would address the issues that you're seeing students have in your course. So once we have them reading deeply and really understanding how the information that we've offered is useful or important or significant in some way, we want to talk about the expectations we have of their writing and how to assess that writing. What is it that teachers want when they ask students to write? What are some of the things that you want when you give a writing assignment? Details. Explanation. They usually don't say enough. Yeah. Say that a little louder, I'm not hearing you. Oh, you would like them to, provide like in their examples, some kind of visual, yes. The SEEI model is useful for that, yes. And I teach them about that, so hopefully some of them will start using that. So writing like the assessment of art involves some subjective judgments. We would like to think that it's clean cut, but it is when it comes to how to assess good writing. All right, next slide. So the potential for wide disagreement about what constitutes good writing is a factor with which both students and teachers must contend. However, there is a way to get close to some sort of general sense of a reasonable expectation from our students in terms of their writing by identifying distinct categories and setting descriptions for high, middle, and low achievement. Is a way to perhaps minimize some of the confusion. I've had students in the past be like, well, I don't understand why I got a B, and they walk away upset because they feel like it's my personal preference that marked them lower than the A that they were hoping for. So, come on. It's so temperamental. So we would like to think that there is a clear, uncontradictable standard for good writing, but the reality is that much of what we consider good is based on an unspoken standard, which is relative to the assignment, the field, or our preferences, and not just what is right or wrong. Now, clearly there are certain rights and wrongs, right? There are certain rules of grammar and punctuation and so forth, but we need to think about the wider context of our expectations and make sure that we're making those expectations visible to our students so they can achieve what it is that we want them to. So rubrics help you to make transparent the sometimes invisible standard. However, the powerful rhetorical effect of the rubric grid and its neat categories pushes us towards pretending an objectivity that does not match the complex mixture of likes and dislikes we feel toward any particular paper. So there's always going to be that. Go back. However, you can modify your rubric so that it reflects what you prioritize and provide students with meaningful assessment. And that is what is really important. Meaningful assessment, which is what we're talking about.
As I said, I think to use the rubrics to give them guidance on what I would like. It's not really how to give feedback. So it should also be the feedback form. Is that what you're suggesting? Yes,
I'm suggesting a combination of rubric. So I'm suggesting, so we have a handout coming around with the various ways in which you can utilize rubrics. One particular characteristic of a rubric is that it allows you to place what your priorities are for a particular assignment, right? And I always, when I design a rubric, draw my rubric from the assignment that I've given. If I've asked you to write a summary, there are certain expectations that I have of a summary. And therefore, I will expect when I assess it, whether you achieve those elements of a summary that I asked you to do, right? So that way we're clear. I asked you to name the author and the title of the text at the beginning. I asked you to identify what his or her main point was and discuss the purpose of that piece, right? So there are certain aspects of a summary that I'm expecting, and certain things are more important to me than others. And so on my rubric, I will outline those things that I prioritize, so they will weigh heavier, those areas of the assignment that you produce will be graded heavier in some areas, and then I'll also include those things that I want you to accomplish, but they may weigh less than those others. And so you may have a range then of high, middle, and low achievement for any one of those areas, and you assess the student on the basis of how close they came to that ideal. And then you can also provide commentary in addition to that breakdown of the assignment in which you assessed, in order to shed further light perhaps on something that maybe was marked on the rubric, right? So there's various ways in which a rubric can help you to do that. Some are more general than others. There's the holistic approach where you just sort of give the impression of the overall piece, and you have a description of what the beautiful ideal essay would look like, and then each one that gets further from that ideal is marked in that way. I particularly prefer the ones that are a little more analytical than that provide sort of the breakdown of the parts of the whole, so that the student does, because I feel like the holistic approach sort of leaves a lot of room for interpretation and can be really confusing. But what you have in your hand are some examples of different types of rubrics, how they are designed, and the ways in which they are broken down, some more detailed than others. And so you can kind of play with what works. And I usually have it when I'm not teaching currently, but when I taught, I would usually have a different rubric for each assignment because I had a different expectation for each assignment.
I think one of the special challenges that we face in English is because a lot of the writing is so subjective. And say, for example, if they're doing a literary analysis, and I have this kid who thinks, you know, they've got their opinion of this point, but that opinion is just from total left field.
Right.
Nothing supported in the point. So they think because that's my opinion,
Right.
I should be able to express it, and I should have an A just for having such a wonderful opinion. And I run into resistance a lot.
Yeah.
You know, so I definitely do try to make rubrics.
Yes.
With every assignment that I do, but even with a rubric, our students are smart. They know you sit there and you make that decision whether you're going to circle this box or that. So they still know to some extent it comes back to how we have reacted personally to the paper. Yeah,
you're not going to avoid that entirely. It's just what it is. And so I suggest, and Bean does as well, which I may be getting ahead of myself, he suggests making it as transparent as possible, what it is that you're looking for. So in the instance that you're talking about, you know, looking at some examples, talking about what counts as a plausible thesis or theory and what is sort of left field, like where are those boundaries, right? And so having some of those conversations ahead of time so that they can understand the perspective that you have on that. Everyone is entitled to their opinion, but every time a student approaches a writing task, it is for a specific purpose and for a specific audience. And so they need to understand that it's not an absolute right or wrong. You certainly have a right to your opinion, but they need to understand that in this case, the audience has a certain expectation of what is a plausible theory. And let's talk about what that is. And if you are a writer wanting to appeal to that particular audience, the awareness of those expectations is what's going to get you closer to the grade that you are hoping for. Not just, you know, the fact that you think it's great. If you are the teacher and you're writing your own paper for yourself, then great, give yourself an A. But guess what? You're the student in a class and the teacher is the audience in this case. So accommodate whatever the expectation of that audience is. And anytime they write anything, there will always be an audience that has a certain expectation. And so if they get into the habit of understanding those two things, what is my purpose and who is my audience, they will be on the path to becoming an effective writer in any context. If you want to impress yourself, write it in your journal. That's the one place where you are your own audience. So get students on the right track early in the writing process. Take advantage of closed form, thesis-governed writing. Enlist Writing Center consultants as first readers of early drafts. And make efficient use of student conferences and develop time-saving methods for grading. So I'm addressing some of the things that teachers might have concerns about when it comes to incorporating writing in their course. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of these. Assignment design is very important because it's where you set the expectations for what it is that you want them to do. You know what, I'm gonna connect that mouse because it's not, the touch screen is not. Can I get the mouse? It's just, I don't know if my, oh, now it's probably gonna go and go and go and go. So using behind the scenes exploratory writing is a good way to get them thinking about the subject matter. And these are the types of exercises that don't require any grading, right? So having them read something, respond to it in their journal, and then discuss it in class, whatever it was that they wrote about. Providing them with certain key questions that you want them to pay attention to, perhaps when they're reading, and then write responses to that in their own personal notebooks. Create the last assignment first, then work backwards. So that's particularly when you have a big assignment at the end, that research paper at the end, chunk it into smaller pieces so that they are working on it throughout the semester. That goes back to the idea of writing as a process. They are not going to do the process on their own. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that now. If you leave them to their own devices, they will just wait until the last week to even look at that assignment. Just go ahead and accept it, right? So to prevent what is inevitable, chunk these smaller assignments that will build on one another and lead to the larger one. And that way you're actually sort of forcing that process and that critical thinking that is required ahead of time. Perhaps depending on the course and the objectives, you don't need a big research paper at the end. We love, as academics, we love research papers. Oh yes, I'm gonna have them write a 20-page paper, great. But if it's a bunch of fluff, what have you actually accomplished, right? It may actually be more useful to assign two or one or two short papers rather than a lot. They're really focused on some specific and crucial aspect of the course and the content and the teaching them the skills that we want them to have, some of those deeper reading and researching skills that are required for those longer research papers that they may not be able to accomplish in a semester. You know, maybe they may not get there for a big paper this semester, but if they have some of the skills to do some of the focus work, that will still be beneficial. So, in fact, Bean talks about the misconception that students have about what even a research paper is. He says the traditional conception of the term paper may be rooted in school reports that call for informational all about writing rather than analysis or argument. Today's students go first to Google with an early stop at Wikipedia rather than to print encyclopedias as they did in the olden days. But their motivation is the same, to find a variety of informational sources that can be assembled into a kind of collage paper that meets the assignment's page limits and number of required sources. According to one study, 87% of freshmen think of research as going to the library and finding books and articles to use in my paper. In other words, when students hear the word research, they think of going to a library. They don't think of, say, observing organisms or pond scum, analyzing body language in a crowded elevator, or investigating longitudinal unemployment data for the last 10 years. Going to a library, or a library portal, in other words, is only part of what happens when many disciplinary professionals pursue research. The term research paper conveys to our students the going to the library part, but leaves out the critical inquiry part. So the question is, how do we teach them to do critical inquiry? Just assigning a research paper is not necessarily going to do that.
I had a student who taught that. He said research is copying.
Yeah, that's it.
I appreciated his honesty.
Right. now he made transparent what his intentions were. So we need to understand that our concept of research is not necessarily their concept of research. And so we actually need to teach them research. We need to break that down and give them maybe some focus assignments that will help them do that before we just throw them to the wolves. Yes.
You mentioned that students, the first thing they do is to give them assignment to the library. Okay. I think nowadays with the cell phone, you just Google.
Yes, right. The idea is the same. Wherever they go, they're just going to get stuff. They're not thinking through it. Whether it's Google or the library databases or whoever or whatever, they're not, the point is they're not thinking about it. They're just like, oh, I have to write about abortion. Let me Google abortion. Oh, here's some stuff about abortion. I'm going to stick it in my paper because it's about abortion. But what's the critical question? What is it that, what is it that they're trying to accomplish? What, you see what I'm saying? So yeah, you're right. And getting them out of, you know, running to Google would be an act of hero, be a hero if you're able to do that anyway. So in terms of your assignment design then, it is more useful what he calls the raft or the tip, to give them a purpose, an audience, a specific genre, and a task to accomplish when you assign some piece of writing. Give them a task as an intriguing problem. So the idea is to try to engage them, right? A real world problem or something that actually the scholars in your field are troubled by. See how they can grapple with some of those things. How would they approach some of those issues, right? So the idea is to construct what Bean calls beautiful problems and see how they can think through the answers to them and finding the answers to them. Providing a rhetorical context helps students develop transferable rhetorical skills that are essential in any writing situation. If you're able to meet with students one-on-one, and I know it's not always possible, it is helpful. Giving them the rubric ahead of time, as well as a model essay from a previous class. I meant to mention that before when we were talking about their idea of a good thesis or what have you. You've given them the rubric and the expectations for a course. Bean suggests potentially bringing a model paper to class and talking about it, giving them the rubric and that model paper and having them graded according to your rubric, right? Separate them into groups, have them discuss the merits of that paper according to what you have given as the expectations and discuss, well, why is this a good thesis and this one isn't, right? And that's an opportunity ahead of time to maybe figure out some of those differences and come to some consensus. Something else that teachers are often concerned about is plagiarism. And as a way to preempt the temptation that students will inevitably have to plagiarize, some professors have them to submit rough drafts and notes with the final paper. I know some professors are like, I don't want all that stuff. But the reality is, if you ask them to give you that stuff, then it sends a message that you're paying attention. And even if you're not looking through each page that they submit with their final paper, if they took the time to construct some stuff to show you that they did the process, even their act of deception can actually benefit them, right? If they have to try to conjure up some notes about their paper in order to look like they did the process, guess what? They're writing notes about their paper. And so even the act of them doing that is useful, and requiring it with your final paper, whether or not you look through each piece, is a valuable thing that could prevent them from actually plagiarizing. They're still benefiting from the assignment that was given. Oh, brother, here we go. Oh, I still have to use this instead. Okay, so using class time to invigorate their thinking ahead of the writing that they are asked to do, letting small groups discuss the problematic questions and debating the different points of view, lead a discussion about the kinds of evidence and arguments needed to support the arguments that have been presented. So talk about, if you're going to make that kind of argument, here's what the audience that you're writing to will be looking for as proof of that perspective, and how can you provide that? Letting students pair up just before or after an early draft is due, and give them interview questions that prompt deeper thinking about the topic. So a lot of times, I know English professors will assign early drafts of the paper, and again, you don't have to just collect everything, you don't have to grade everything, make it a requirement, and then have them interview one another about the merits of a particular paper that they have brought a draft of.
Any suggestions on how to do that in online environment?
I have a handout on peer review, which is some questions that you might give them. So in their discussion board,
Yeah.
maybe.
They don't see each other.
Right, so is there a way for them to share papers with one another and then talk about it, like in the discussion board or something? No? Okay. I know that discussion boards are usually used for that sort of dialogue.
It's just that you've got 30 students sharing with the other students.
The other thing, just respond to one other person. Give them the person that they're to respond to. You respond to this person. Also, right. But also, if they're not able for whatever reason to submit the draft, let's say it's 5 pages, 10 pages, whatever it is, have them write an abstract of their own draft. It makes them reflective of what they've written thus far. And then they can provide an abstract of their draft to their peer to say, here's the gist of what I'm talking about in my paper, and then get feedback on that. So it does double work, because then they're reflecting on what they're saying, and then they're also getting feedback on the ideas that they have presented in their draft. So I would discourage you from assigning outlines, particularly ahead of a paper that is due, ahead of them doing any writing towards that ultimate draft. Now, if you want to, I would suggest that you want them to submit an outline of it, have them do some writing first and then do an outline of what they've written. The reason is, although teachers have traditionally required students to submit outlines in advance, both research and theory show that requiring outlines is not as effective as they imagine. It distorts the composing process of many writers who discover and clarify their ideas in the act of writing, and undervalues drafting as a discovery process. So every writer has his or her own way of writing, whatever they approach a writing task. But for the most part, when you're engaging with a beautiful problem, you got to think it through. You may not know ahead of time what your ideas are, what your perspectives are, how they all break down. So if you have to allow for the sort of exploration of one's own ideas and perspective, rather than making it as if everyone already has that figured out ahead of time, because very few writers do. Some do. I have met writers that work it all out in their head first, and then they can put it down on paper. But assuming that all writers operate that way by assigning an outline at the very beginning of a writing assignment actually sends the wrong message, sends a different message from what it is I think we're trying to send.
Stay on the path.
Yes.
Versus, how do you get them to like stay on the path? Because especially like if you're really engaged in research, or at least in my head, it's like everything seems good because you can like see all these different connections and whatnot. How do you
when you do that research and you've got all kind of good stuff that's coming at you in a different direction, how do you sit down and write an outline in that moment at the very beginning? Like, don't you have to do some writing?
But it might kind of get me at least like a start, so, at least I'm not, in Florida when I need to stay here in LA.
But I would suggest that I have to drive around a little while before I get to the destination that I'm trying to get to.
That's one of the things that's what you did in outlines that get from students so that they review the articles or like, okay, I just want the reference. I don't need to do anything, just so you can actually make sure they stay on track and are actually doing something. Right? Don't want to go off and making like different something. And that's what I'm doing. I started using small tasks that not necessarily an outline, but making sure that I actually doing something.
Right, and you can comment on those things and say, okay, I see the direction you're going in, but you seem to be talking about a lot of things. You need to figure out which of those you really want to go with. Then you send them back to the writing process where they kind of think, okay, yeah, I am talking a lot about this and that or the other. But this is why we are trying to get them writing early in the course and doing writing throughout, so that they have opportunity to figure those things out. They come to the peer review of a draft and they figure out that they're all over the place and they go back. They're not yet fearful of your grading pen, right? With the outlines, we have teachers that are marking where they have the periods and the Roman numerals on things that the kid is still trying to figure out his way, and it just shuts down that exploration that is needed in order to accomplish what we're really, the critical thinking goes out the door. Now all I'm concerned about is whether my sentences line up, right? So like, the idea is to teach them that writing is a process, and that you will be assessed at the end of that process, not in the middle where you're still trying to figure it out. When we write, we would be horrified if someone asked us to submit our work at the beginning of our process. We'd be like, wait, I'm still working it out, right? So why do we expect so much of them so soon in their process? I have had students come to me and say, I cannot change anything. I have an outline, I've already submitted it, it's been approved, I'm locked in. So when we're working with them, they're like, no, I can't explore that idea because I've already written this, and the teacher is gonna penalize me if I go a different direction. Outlines work for informative papers, which take a large topic and break it down into smaller parts, but a thesis-governed paper requires complex meanings that can only be worked out through composing and revising. And ultimately, what we are wanting our students to do is revision, to look again, and to think about what it is that you're saying. We want them to think, right? That's the big thing. We want them to think and to know how to think. So some examples of early assignments: prospectus, 2-sentence thesis, and abstracts of the draft. I think I have a handout for examples of assignments. Yes, assignment design. Yes, that one. Yes. Can I see your copy? The first page of this handout gives 3 options for an assignment. And I want you to read each of them and tell me which one seems to be a better assignment to give if we're trying to accomplish what we say that we want to accomplish or want them to do. And then also the multidisciplinary, give them that as well. So the other handout that's coming around is a breakdown of the way in which different disciplines look at problems and the genres that are used by individuals in those areas to convey information, to argue perspectives, and so forth. So it's a way to think about, well, what is my field? What are the genres that are used within my discipline? And how can I assign assignments so that my students that fit with what we actually do and engage with the questions that we actually ask in this field. So which of the 3 assignments seem to be better? 2, why?
It's an introductory.
Yeah.
It's specific, but also it requires processing information for specific audience rather than just being technical. For introductory idea of things that you think of processing yourself, you have to do it yourself.
Yes. So, right. Remember the raft and the tip? You know, thinking in terms of the role, what was the A? Did y'all write that down? I could go back to it.
Audience.
Right. So incorporating those things in the assignment so that there's a specific context within which a student is operating for this assignment, and they're able to think through the purpose and the audience when they do their writing and the genre that is going to best meet that need. And so that means it's not necessarily a research paper, right? It might be a grant proposal, or it might be a memo, or it might be some other type of document that serves a specific purpose. So there's more examples of assignments in that packet that you have. I'm seeing our time is running away, so I'll let you read that on your own time. I mentioned that if you're able to meet with students one-on-one, that's a great opportunity to sort of dialogue about your expectations, give them feedback on those drafts or those early versions of their assignment, help them to organize their ideas. That's an opportunity to sort of get a sense of what the grammatical errors that they're dealing with, and talk to them about what they should look for, and I'll come back to grammar in a little bit. And then you might even, if you have large classes, you might even have a few students come and see you at a time. Maybe some professors suspend class during certain periods of the semester so they can just meet with students one-on-one and talk about some of the issues that they may be running into with whatever the writing assignment is that they've been given. So I want to, as we start to wrap up, I want to have us consider ourselves as coaches of learning, not critics. Right? And if we take the role of a coach, then our approach to students' writing will also change. When we comment on papers, the role we should play is that of a coach providing guidance for revision. For it is in the act of revising that our students learn most deeply what they want to say and what their readers need for comprehension. As I said earlier, revising is rethinking, reconceptualizing, seeing again. And it is through the hard work of revising that students learn how experienced writers really operate. I want us to think of the draft as he says, a draft is to a finished product as a caterpillar is to a butterfly. All that's missing is the metamorphosis. I thought that was great. And so he says, try to imagine the butterfly while critiquing the caterpillar. The purpose of the end comment is not to justify the current grade, but to help writers make the kinds of revisions that will move the draft toward excellence. When I was an early professor, teacher, lecturer, I would give all these extensive comments on the final paper that they turned in. Beautifully written comments, in-depth comments about all the things that was good and bad about the paper. You know what happened? I was the only one who read those comments, because those students never came back and picked up that paper. They were gone. They turned that thing in and never looked back. And I realized I was doing all this work of providing all this great feedback to students who couldn't care less about that paper or my feedback. And I wasn't doing them any good. So I began to discover that it was more profitable for me to provide that feedback earlier on in the semester so they could actually do something with it.
So I used to try that approach. But then they would think it's just a product of bother. So now I just make sure I promise a final product that it's due a month before the semester, and then after they all turn it in, have a second basis. And it's the only way I can seem to turn in a reasonable product the first time around. I don't know if any other solutions.
Yeah, you got to figure out what works. I have some, I think I may have a handout on commenting, and I think the assignments also, the assignment descriptions talk about the ways in which you can use those early assignments to give feedback on things that you expect. So there's various ways to do that. The idea is to not load it up at the end, right? It's to figure out ways to give them feedback all along. That's with the conferencing, that's with the peer review, that's with the class discussions of expectations. So save yourself the ink, right? And just talk about it in class, right? When you do offer commentary, whether it is face-to-face or in writing, consider, first of all, giving them minimal comments also, because the other thing that we often do is tell them all the things that are wrong with what they are doing thus far. And that just frustrates and overwhelms them, right? They can't make all the changes that you want them to. And the idea is that we're too focused too often on the product. We want the perfect clean product, so we want to tell them all the things that's wrong with it because we just want them to get that perfect clean product. But the question is, what is the priority in this moment for this student in this time, at this time in the semester? We might have to let some of that other stuff go. What is more important for them to accomplish with this task, and give them that feedback?
How do I figure that out?
Well, it's based on,
That's where I struggle in that I want the structural comprehension understanding, but I actually need to be able to write a sentence that makes sense. And I can't do both of the same thing.
yes, deal with the first thing first.
And I never know where, but I can't read it. I can't do the big picture stuff.
Right,
But there's no point in me having to read them. And
Yes.
this is where I get myself.
yes.
Yes.
So step back for a minute, because sometimes we get lost in the weeds because we're distracted by the surface errors. Step back for a minute. What is this writer saying? If you don't know, have a conversation with that student. They usually can explain it verbally much better than they can in writing. Then once you have an idea what it is that they're trying to say, then you talk to them about how best to say that or do that. And then point out that you have a lot of issues with subject-verb agreement, or I see a lot of comma splices, or you seem to also be struggling with spelling or whatever it is. Go figure out that, point them to the resources for help with that. But they have to have enough desire to improve to go for those. It's not your job to teach them grammar. It's your job to help them make the information clear. So focus on that first, and then give them the information that they need to fix those things that are interfering, and make it their responsibility. Make it a penalty that by the end, now you give them plenty of time in the process, but by the end, these things are going to need to be fixed or at least improved, because they're always going to be errors. They're not, the poor will always be with you, the Bible says. Those things will always be there, but you tell them, these are the things you need to work on. And there's an expectation at the end that there will be some movement in that area. So do what you, give them the motivation to want to fix those things, because they will be more inclined to do so and for the change to actually stick than if you just point it out each time. Send them to us also. Send them to us, but understand that we also will prioritize our feedback. We also are going to focus first on what it is that you want them to accomplish with this. And then we'll talk to them about the surface areas, and we'll give them those resources that they need to fix them. But either way, the responsibility is on them, not us, to do it.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned that. You mentioned that whatever works. Okay? So you mentioned that no outlines as one of the ideas, no outlines. I don't know that in the world of technical science, because or science, engineering.
I'm not saying no outlines ever. I'm saying no outlines in the early stages of the writing process. Give them an opportunity to figure out what it is they're saying before you require them to tell you what it is they're saying. The outline is not going to help them figure out the complexity of an issue. If it's something that's actually complex, that they have to kind of think through and work through and question and wonder, they're not going to do that, be able to produce that early on. You can give them some assignments prior to that that will help them explore the topic and engage with the issues and dialogue about the problems, and then assign an outline later on in the process once they've worked through some of those things. So I'm not saying no outlines ever. I'm just talking about making sure that we are emphasizing the importance of the process. If we want them to be deep, critical thinkers and learners, we have to give them the opportunity to think through things and work them out. A critical thinker is one that questions and engages with problems, and we have to give them the opportunity to do that. Okay, so all of us as teachers late at night, having read whole stacks of student essays, sometimes forget the human being who wrote the words that currently frustrate us. We become harsh or sarcastic. We let our irritation show on the page, even though we know we ourselves how we feel when we ask a colleague to read one of our drafts. We sometimes forget that these feelings, that they have those as well, and we don't treat students' work in progress with the same sensitivity that we bring to our colleagues' work. So I am suggesting that we give them some grace in spite of the frustration. I liken it to parenting once again. How many of us have experienced the incessant and annoying questioning stage of the child? But we're their first teacher. If we don't tell them, how else will they know? Sometimes we assume they know these things coming in. What if they don't? Who's going to tell them if you don't? Right? When you discover that they don't, perhaps it's up to you to teach them. All right, so in the text, Bean talks about if someone was learning tennis and the tennis teacher just told the student all the the person who's learning tennis, all the things they're doing wrong. How useful would that be for the person who's learning? You didn't hold the racket properly. You didn't toss the ball in the correct plane. You threw it too high. You didn't rock your wrist properly and you look awkward. Our comments are rhetorical. We can't just focus on what we mean. We have to also consider how they will be read. And a lot of times the message that we send is that you're awful. You're not making it and you never will. Even using red ink, the colors have meaning. Even the red of the ink, I've had students talk about all the time, yeah, my teacher bled all over my page. It just has such a negative, sends such a negative message. The purpose of the comments should be to stimulate revision, comment on drafts, not the final copy, or allow rewrites. So that whole thing of pretending like this is the final version and then commenting on it and having them turn it in again. That is very useful. Also, not commenting on everything. Don't wear yourself out. Pick the most important things that would make the biggest difference on this particular assignment. Comment in order of importance, working from the bigger issues down to the more local ones, and maybe even grading without comments and then discussing a model paper in class. Those are ways that you might give feedback. Approaching comments in the same way that you would approach an employee review. First, you want to start with the positive and what's working first. Have them leverage what they're doing well in order to work on what they're not doing well. Right? That's how we treat colleagues when we are in other settings. We lead with the positive and then move to those areas of improvement. Right? So let's try to use that sort of language so that it shows that it gives them the sense that they can accomplish it, that they are actually able to do what it is you're asking them to do, rather than beating them up and telling them all the things they've done wrong so that they feel defeated and don't even try, which I think too often actually happens. So these are some of the questions you might ask for bigger issues and more local issues. I'll move on past that. I think I have a handout. Did we pass it all already for the how to comment or how to give feedback? The commenting. I think it was number. We did that already? Okay. No, not that one. Okay, so my hope is that today's presentation demonstrates that there's so much more to good writing than good grammar. It's not to say that grammar isn't important, but if a student doesn't know what he or she is talking about, or if he or she is able to write and speak without thought or reflection, will improving his or her grammar really help? So that's an important question that I would like us to consider. Sometimes we give grammar too much credit. Fixing subject and verb agreement and punctuation and apostrophes doesn't get at some of the core issues that a lot of times our students have in their writing. And so it's better to consider grammar within the context of whatever it is that they are trying to say. So I have I have a sample student essay, yes, that I just want you to look at quickly. I'll give you the hard copy and then we'll just read it together. And I want you to tell me what it is that stands out first to you when you encounter a paper like this. It says Garrett Hardin and Peter Singer have both written essays that are thought-provoking. What I'm reading here is on your sheet, you can't see this. Hardin has the strongest argument. On the other hand, Singer has some good things to say too, but his arguments aren't as strong as Hardin's because he's too idealistic, meaning he believes people will give up things like color TV and stereos to third world people, even though they will have earned these things through their own hard work. This is what I don't like about Singer. Hardin believes in private property and I do too. Another weakness of Singer, blah, blah, blah. So what would you first want to comment on if you were to encounter this?
That first part of that paragraph gives me no idea what he's talking about, and I want context. That would be, I would like to understand the context and flow of what that is. That would be primarily.
Okay. Just see the errors. So you would comment first on that? Okay, but I assume that if you saw that first, that would be the first thing you would respond to. Mm-hmm.
After the class, then I might,
Mm-hmm. So how, on the hierarchy of importance, where does grammar come in your mind? Mm-hmm.
It all depends on the class. So, ironically,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that I would have questions like that person have written, have both written answers for the possible. I'm probably like, okay, what type of essay, so the content on the people, like that.
Some of that background information. Okay, so one professor marked it this way. They were inclined to sort of jump at the surface issues also. Fix the spelling, comma splice, fragment, look up 2, 2, and 2. Don't put antecedents of pronouns and parentheses after the pronoun. So we're familiar with that sort of marking, right? This other professor, however, didn't mark any of those things. The marginal comments are, is this your first point about Singer? A first weakness of Singer is that he is realistic, expand, and explain. Excellent insight here. Different attitudes about private property are at the heart of their differences, but you raise the point and then drop it without development. So these comments, if you look at the difference between the two, what do you think the first student, the first example would produce from the student? They would fix those surface errors, right? They figure out how to put the commas and all those different things. But would the passage be improved if that was what they fixed? No, because we still have the questions about the background and what was the argument and how did the two compare and why do you agree and not disagree or what have you. And so it just proves the point that if our goal is for them to fix grammar, then we can certainly show them where the errors are and maybe they'll fix the errors. Maybe they will remember how to do it and maybe not. They'll probably make those same errors again and again and again and frustrate the heck out of you. But which would you be more satisfied with if the grammar errors stayed, but the ideas became clearer? If they responded to the questions in this marginal, these marginal notes and actually explained the perspectives and talked about the differences and engaged with the ideas, even if the errors were still there, I think you would notice the improvement. And so I think that's really the point that I'm making, is that we need to keep an eye on our goals. By emphasizing ideas and organization and making students find and fix their own errors, instructors will be doing the best we can hope for in light of our current knowledge about language competence. It may not be what you want to hear, but I believe that it is the best way to achieve the goal of helping students produce intelligent, graceful, well-argued, and largely error-free essays. Trust me. Trust me. Try it before you, don't knock it till you try it. All right, I know we are way past our time. I thank you so much for coming. I know, like I said, I had a lot to cover and it was just hard to get it all in, but certainly I would appreciate if you talk to me after, if you send your students here. As I said before, we have workshops coming up where we will talk about reading strategies and note-taking strategies and research process. And, again, we are here to be a resource for you and your students.